It's Raiders and Broncos, Week 12, Allegiant Stadium, coming up on Sunday. We got to break that down on Crossover Thursday on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for Thursday, November 21st, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you're finding us wherever you get your favorite podcast or if you're checking us out on YouTube. Either way, we definitely appreciate that. The show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your support, Raider Nation. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, that's because of my man, Ari. Ari does a fantastic job behind the scenes, making sure that we look really good, we sound really good, takes a lot of pride in his work, and we definitely appreciate that. You can hit him up on Twitter, show your appreciation as well, at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And normally, we have the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693 if you want to be a part of the show. We won't have any calls or texts today. We'll get back to that on Fridays. We close out the show really strong, close out the week really strong as well, send you into the weekend and send you into Week 12 action, Raiders and Broncos. But today, one of my favorite days of the week, one of Raider Nation's favorite days of the week. I know a lot of fans tune in for this show in particular, which is the crossover edition. If this is the first time you're tuning into the show and you don't know what the crossover edition is, well, that's when the next opponent up on the schedule for the Silver and Black joins the show, and we talk about that team, and we talk about the Raiders. We talk about offensive and defensive storylines, and we talk about keys to victory. So this week, it is the Denver Broncos. So Cody Roark, longtime host of the Locked On Broncos podcast, he joins the show. One of my favorite guys to do shows with. He's fantastic. One of the guys that welcomed me into the Locked On Podcast Network family when I started, and he showed me a few little tips here and there. Great dude. Fantastic dude, as a matter of fact. So great times being able to chop it up with him, talk some Broncos, talk some Raiders, and we're going to go ahead and do that in segment number 1, 2, and 3 here on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor, which is Prize Picks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Segment number 1, we're going to talk all things Raiders as Cody Roark is going to kind of get his Howard Cosell on, and ask me a few questions here and there about the team, get the storylines for the offense and the defense. We'll go ahead and jump into it right now. Cody Roark and myself talking all things Raiders in part 1 of our conversation on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast.
Q, I hate to be cliche here, but what is going on with the Raiders? I mean, the last time early on, before all the storylines that really formulated the rest of the season here before that first matchup, was Davante Adams had the hamstring injury. Well, he's no longer there now. What has gone on since that whole debacle?
Well, I'll tell you this, man. What really was the momentum change, I feel like, in the season for the Raiders was the pick 6 to Pat Surtain. Right? I mean, it's like I quoted it the other day. Remember the movie Friday, and they said Debo woke up, or Chris Tucker woke up in Debo's pigeon coop, and he ain't never been the same. It says Smokey woke up in Debo's pigeon coop. He ain't never been the same. I kind of said that's what happened to the Raiders, right? They threw that pick 6 to Patrick Surtain, and it was all different after that. And they're on a current 6-game losing streak, right? And they're trying to find their way. They've obviously had a lot of issues along the way. As you mentioned, Davante Adams is no longer with the team. He's now in New York with the Jets, and they're not doing much better. So there's that. But, the Raiders are just trying to find their way. They've been dealing with a ton of injuries, and it just kind of is what it is at this stage of the game. So they're trucking along. Antonio Pierce is dealing with the issues as a first-year head coach. He's leaning heavily on Marvin Lewis and Joe Philbin and Tom Coughlin to try to get some advice and guidance as they're going through this rough stretch. But you know how it is, man. I mean, when you're going through a rough stretch, there's nothing you could do but play it out. And so that's what they're doing. And they'll welcome in the Broncos this week and see how this game goes.
Well, look, the Broncos, obviously they snapped their losing streak to the Raiders this year, but they still have not yet won a game in Las Vegas, which, I look at a Raiders team here that's 2-8, their backs up against the wall. Things are not going how they've planned, certainly, from the season. And I look at the Denver team whose momentum's kind of rising up, and it's like, to me, Q, I feel like this could be a trap game here for Denver. Like, you don't want this young team to overlook a Raiders team that's struggling. Because, hey, I still look at it as like when Bo Nix is lined up there, at quarterback, it's like, hey, you still have to worry about number 98, the boogeyman. He's plays with a high motor. But then when you look at the Raiders offense, it's like, Brock Bowers, he's putting up numbers. Look, one of his 3 touchdowns this season came against the Broncos really on that first drive that all of a sudden put the Broncos into like, oh, no, what's going on? And then you mentioned the Pat Surtain pick six there. Despite the season at 2-8, despite how things are going with this team, what have been some of the silver linings, pun intended here, for this Raiders team?
Well, I'll say this, man. There's no quit, right? I mean, there's teams that are 2-8 that you could say, oh, yeah, they're done, right? They don't care about the rest of the season. They can't wait till it's over. 3-2-1 Cancun, let's go. That's not the Raiders. That's one thing I could say about them from being in the locker room, being at practice, talking to the coaches and talking to the players. You could tell that they're still fighting for their coach. They're still fighting for each other in that locker room. So that, to me, is a positive sign. That tells me that the culture is different than what it was when Josh McDaniels was the head coach, where it felt like everything was done. There was a big, super dark cloud over the organization. It doesn't feel like that with this Raiders team. Now, I mean, that's great and all, that you can still fight hard, but you got to win games as well. So I just think that they really would like to see a win or two. I feel like that there's been some opportunities for them to get wins. They just haven't been able to finish games. Like, a perfect example is a week ago against the Miami Dolphins. They have really good offense where it looks like it makes sense, right? They have double-digit plays where they're having sustained drives, but when they get to the red zone, then they end up getting field goals as opposed to touchdowns. And so, when you have a limited amount of snaps and drives, you have to cash in, and they weren't able to do that. So it's small things here and there that lead to big things that lead to losses. And that's, again, the reason why they're on a 6-game losing streak. But I do think that they're going in there with everything they have to try to win these games.
Well, and I think another thing too, when you look at, trying to find your footing at 2-8, trying to find some momentum, it's hard to do when you're banged up. And I ain't gonna lie to you, I looked at the injury report because we get it sent out here from the NFL, and I was like, dang, all these guys are out of practice. Like they didn't practice. And so kind of tell us a little bit about that, because I think Broncos country wants to know, because I think most Broncos fans know going into it, hey, a guy who's had success against Denver in the past is Amir White, might not play in this game. You take a look at, obviously, Alexander Madison, a guy who's had some success against Denver before, might not play in this game. So what does the injury report look like? Who are the players that are obviously the most impactful ones that are on that report that say, hey, this could change the perspective of this outcome on Sunday?
Yeah, the injury report is long, man. It's really long. And on Wednesday, 8 guys did not participate. And that's rare, right? I mean, again, a couple weeks ago against Cincinnati, they had all these guys, about 6 or 8 guys that left the game with ankle injuries. And so there's still a bunch of guys that are dealing with the ankle injury. You mentioned Zamir White and Alexander Madison. And Madison, he's got one of those ankle injuries. Zamir White has a quadriceps injury. I would not be shocked to see neither one of those running backs play. So it'll most likely be the Amir Abdullah and Dylan Lobby show. Don't expect to see them running between the tackles too much, but they could catch some passes out of the backfield. As far as the corners go, I mean, Cody, there was a point last game against Miami where the 3 starting cornerbacks were all out. Nate Hobbs never played in the game because he was out with the ankle injury, one he suffered against Cincinnati. Jacorian Bennett left on the first drive with a shoulder injury. And then Jack Jones, who's the best playmaking cornerback that the Raiders have as far as coming up with interceptions and pick sixes, and he actually has a pick 6 on the season, he left with a back injury. So those are all 3 of the starting corners. So there's a good chance that none of those guys play this week as well. They didn't practice on Wednesday. When we talked to Antonio Pierce, he didn't seem like he was too confident that they'd be able to go, and he'll give us a better update on Friday. But I would not be shocked at all if you don't see those guys out there. And then you're seeing rookies like Cam Richardson out there. You're seeing a Darnay Holmes, who's a younger dude, out there. You're seeing guys like that don't quite have the skins on the wall as these other guys, and they're going to have to do the best that they can. But literally, it's the next man up, and the Raiders I don't like to make, like excuses for why they're not playing well. But, man, they've had so many injuries all season long. Malcolm Kuntz never made it to the season. He tore his ACL. Christian Wilkins is on IR. He was the big free agent pickup for the middle. Marcus Epps back in. He tore his ACL, so he's out for the season. I mean, they just have injury after injury. Max Crosby's missed a game this season. I mean, and he never misses anything, right? So, I mean, they've been dealt a terrible hand when it comes to injuries. Again, you can't make excuses because I know that every team has to deal with it. Hell, there was a time when the Broncos had, was it, their running back play quarterback or whoever that was, So, I mean, there's nobody going to feel sorry for the Raiders. They just got to go out there and play the best they can with what they have.
Yeah, and for Antonio Pierce, it's hard to build what you want to, especially being, the first year head coach full time. And look, I'll be remiss if I don't bring this up. I know a lot of the conversation on your show as of late has been around Shedeur Sanders,
Yeah.
the quarterback here for CU. I mean, even just being around people who cover the Buffs on the beat and they come and spend some time on the Broncos beat as well from time to time. Even they're talking about like, hey, like Shedeur to Vegas seems like a great fit. Obviously, with Shadeur's relationship with Tom Brady, I know that there's going to be a microscope on that in terms of tampering and things like that. Like you don't want to have those conversations too early for Tom, but it's like Tom's going to have influence. I recall Mark Davis saying, hey, like when Tom took out, got approved for that ownership stake, it's like, hey, Tom's going to help us pick the next quarterback. And it very well could be Shedeur.
Yeah, and I'm here for that, right? I've said it, and it's funny because I try to tell everyone that I don't like to dive into draft talk in November.
Yeah, it's
because
hard.
there's so much time leading up to the draft. But in reality, when you're a 2-8 team and the quarterback is one of your main issues that you have, and I don't think anyone believes Gardner Minshew is the franchise quarterback moving forward, especially not a guy that can compete with Mahomes and Herbert, and obviously now Bo Nix, who I know we'll get to and what he's been able to do. He's been playing really well as of late. You can't compete with Minshew. And Aiden O'Connell, I don't think he's the answer. He didn't really get a chance because you want to talk about injuries. As soon as he finally gets a chance, he gets a thumb. He gets a broken thumb. And so then he's out. So there might be a couple weeks until he returns from IR, and then he'll get a chance to prove what he can or cannot do. But I'll tell you, man, I'm all here for Shedeur. I think he would be fantastic as the franchise quarterback, and I think he'd give the Raiders a real chance to compete with the other arms that are in the AFC West. And as you know, those arms in the AFC West are really, really good arms.
Yeah, and it's evolving a little bit. Well, we could be very well heading back to the conversation point. Hey, the AFC West could be competitive and fun here in the next year or two. A lot to be excited about there, but obviously a lot going on in the Las Vegas Raiders side of things. Broncos country is getting to know a little bit from your boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders. Here in a second, we're going to dive into the Denver Broncos side of things as Raiders Nation will learn a little bit more about what's going on with the Broncos really since that Week 5 game where Denver got their first win against the Raiders in a long time. We'll break that down and much more here on today's crossover episode, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders.
So there was part one, all things Raiders, offensive and defensive storylines, kind of what went wrong. And you see I had to point out that pick 6 Week 5 against Denver. Seems like after Pat Surtain took that ball to the house, things ain't never been the same for the Silver and Black. But we'll do that, offensive, defensive storylines, in segment number 2 for the Denver Broncos. So what has changed since that Week 5 game where the Denver Broncos got their first victory over the Raiders in a very, very long time? Well, Cody Roark will educate us. He'll learn us coming up in segment number 2 with today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a couple of great sponsors here on the Locked On Raiders podcast today, including Bilt Rewards. And renters, listen up. If you ever feel like you're stuck in the loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air, it's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Bilt Rewards comes in. Bilt is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent every month. Pay your rent and watch the Bilt points roll in. You could use points to jet off on a dream vacation or put your points toward a flight or hotel stay with 500-plus airlines and 700,000-plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them toward a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Bilt Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Bilt points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Right now, earn points by paying rent when you go to joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's join, joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use our URL so they know that we sent you. Join bilt.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. I also want to tell you about our great friends at FanDuel. And you need to get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, all new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So coming up on Sunday, if you get a hunch in the middle of this Raiders and Broncos game, you feel like that, hey, this is going to be an offensive firepower, a bunch of shootouts, you can hit the over on the game if you want. Or if you think it's a defensive struggle, go ahead and punch the under. Whatever the case may be, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, crossover edition. Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and myself talked all things silver and black in segment number 1. So now it's time to return the favor and talk all things Denver Broncos. So we start off with Cody talking about what has led to the Broncos playing at the level that they are right now, as they're currently 6-5. He starts things off here on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast.
Well, I mean, you really brought it up in the first segment. It was like the Raiders season changed on the Pat Surtain pick 6. So did the Broncos. Like it was just Denver's down 10-0. I mean, 10-3 at that point. Minshew and that offense are driving, and they have a chance to go up 17-3, or at worst, you go up 13-3. And then all of a sudden you tie the game up, pick 6 there. That was a momentum changing play, but it's crazy to think about the parallels of how it impacted the season for both teams, because from that point, Bo Nix got the ball back, and Bo had 2 passing touchdowns against the Raiders in this game, one to Josh Reynolds. And obviously that was one where Josh Reynolds hurt his hand and ended up on IR. He could be back this Sunday for the game, ironically enough, against the Raiders. But then it's, Bo had a rushing touchdown. So a 3 total touchdown performance. It's like, okay, now this kid's starting to get a little bit more comfortable, considering he had a rough start in weeks 1 and weeks 2. But I think he's just gotten more confident in Sean Payton's offense. And certainly, Courtland Sutton has become his number 1 target. The distribution early on wasn't as even. Now Courtland is a heavily produced target here for Bo Nix, but it's now you got a 7th-round rookie, Devon Vele out of Utah, who's the second favorite target, 42 total snaps overall in the Broncos game against the Falcons here. But the thing is, you're seeing Bo Nix make throws that, he wasn't making necessarily weeks 1, weeks 2, and even week 5 in that regard. He's knowing where to go with the football. He understands where pressure's coming from. He's not taking sacks, which for Sean Payton, in comparison to where Russell Wilson was, that was Sean's biggest gripe about Russell Wilson, is that Russ took too many sacks. Bo hasn't done that. He's been very smart with protecting the football, not making the same mistake twice. And he's dealing, obviously, coming off AFC Offensive Player of the Week, a very impressive performance against the Atlanta Falcons there. But, hey, every time I see the Broncos lining up, the one guy who's always had consistently big games against Denver, it's been Max Crosby. He had 2 sacks in that first matchup in week 5. And once again, I mean, that was him coming off of an ankle injury. I mean, he was coming off hobbling. I remember watching the Friday video. I think you posted it. He's doing a Euro step in practice. I'm like, okay, he's questionable, but he's going to play. He has truly been a boogeyman here, but the Broncos offensive line has definitely gotten a lot better. So I think that's going to be a really big key here to see unfold a little bit on Sunday. But Denver they feel like they found their quarterback, and certainly he's progressed. You haven't seen any regression here from Bo Nix. You hope you can maintain that here. And just like I said, take it one game at a time and look, the Broncos, I can tell you this, they're not overlooking the Raiders, even though these guys don't like each other. There's that rivalry there. They're not overlooking each other, though.
No, I don't doubt that at all. I mean, I think you throw the records out the window when these two teams get together, just because, like you said, neither team likes each other. But, you mentioned Bo Nix is gaining confidence, and obviously you're seeing Sean Payton get more confidence in him and probably put more on his plate as well. But how much confidence are you seeing from the team starting to have more confidence in that rookie quarterback? Like, okay, this guy can be our leader. This guy can be our franchise quarterback. Yeah, let's ride with this dude.
Yeah, and look, I think that it's crazy to think about the fact that, hey, Denver's got a quarterback that this whole locker room has bought into. And look, it's a rookie, and it's, you're going to get that from your offensive guys, but it's even defensive guys like Pat Surtain saying, hey, Bo should be rookie of the year. Like, he's coming out and says, Bo can throw it. Like, I've had conversations with Pat, even going back to training camp, and while there was a competition, so to speak, there. And Pat told me, he said, nah, Bo's legit. Bo's the real deal. He knows how to. He's not afraid of trying to attack him, which is good. But I think the thing with Bo is just there is a belief in the locker room. And Sean Payton told us on Monday earlier this week. He says that this locker room they have this belief in Bo. They're saying, hey, we know he's going to protect the football. We know he's going to keep us, in close games. We have a chance. I mean, they battled Patrick Mahomes and lose a heartbreaker in Arrowhead due to a blocked field goal. But I think from that moment, everyone's like, hey, yeah, Bo's the guy that can compete, with the Justin Herberts, with the Patrick Mahomes, and we'll see how the quarterback situation eventually plays out in Vegas. But Denver feels like they've got their guy, and the defense is so bought in. Like, defensive guys are like, wow, we got a quarterback. Like, that right there is a little bit of a change in the dynamic here. And then all those offensive guys, even the vets like Courtland Sutton, they're like, hey, we believe in him. He's our guy. We're excited to be on this ride with him.
You know, it's funny when you look at the defense and you saying that the defense is saying, hey, that's the quarterback. You know, it's probably easier for them to go get the ball now and say, hey, we can give it back to Bo because he can go get it done. Because honestly, Cody, when I looked at this Denver Broncos team this season, my expectations were the defense was going to be really strong. They were going to have a good run game and they were going to ease this rookie into it. But it seems like they've definitely fast tracked that when it comes to the offense. Are you surprised that the rookie Bo Nix, I know he's an older rookie, but still, are you surprised that he caught up to the Sean Payton system as quickly as he did and is putting up the numbers and potentially being offensive rookie of the year, as many are talking about him right now?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll be honest here. Like I've always been an Oregon Ducks fan, right? So for the last 2 years, watching Bo at Oregon, I was like,
That's
man,
dangerous, man. You got Colorado in your backyard. How are you an Oregon fan?
Well, I lived half my life in Oregon.
Okay.
Over there.
Be careful. Don't say it too loud, man.
Yeah. But I was like, I always say like, hey, last time the Ducks and the Buffs played, the Ducks, they Ducks, they ran the score up on it. It was 42-6. Could have been a lot worse there. Right. But with Bo, like I always thought, like even 2 years ago when he first came, I was like, man, Bo might be a fun fit for Sean Payton. And then I put a tweet out last year saying, hey, Bo Nix is going to look good in a Broncos uniform during the college football season. And then it was like, okay, hey, now it starts to make sense that Sean Payton could build this offense in a way that's like, hey, he's got his guy because of certain traits there. Now, I think he's exceeded expectations here, Q. And certainly there's still some areas he can improve on there. And even Sean and Bo will tell you that themselves. But there's just a level of comfort. And I think there's just a level of calmness. And, Bo doesn't get too high with the highs, doesn't get too low with the lows. He moves on from a bad play relatively quickly. So that right there, I think, has just been, a nice addition there. And even just seeing the stuff that I was seeing from Bo in training camp, Broncos, like people around the world, like during training camp, put a clip out there and said, I think Denver can win 10 games. We're like, oh, you're crazy. You don't know ball, like all that stuff. And I was like, no, I just think that with the defense, knowing how the defense can play, and certainly the defense is exceeding expectations that I've had. You lose Justin Simmons and your defense is playing as good as it is. Okay. That kind of caught me by surprise a little bit. And then just with how Bo was playing and how he's progressed, now I'm like, hey, that is a real possibility here. But they've lost some games early on in the season. You lose a heartbreaker to Kansas City. Now your room for error here is you're really trying to keep that 7th playoff spot or maybe even move up a spot. It's going to be tough, and the Raiders are going to be a tough test at that.
Yeah, no, they will. And it's going to be fun to see these two teams get together. And so offensively, everything looks like it's going the way it's supposed to go. You mentioned the defense and playing better than you expected, especially without Justin Simmons. And they definitely are playing better than I expected. And I expected them to be a good defense, but they're playing at a very high level. What is it that Vance Joseph is doing? How is he pushing all the right buttons to get that defense to play at the level that it is playing at?
Man, they revamped the trenches here. And look, it wasn't like widespread changes. They got a couple of really big pieces, right? They got John Franklin Myers, who, in my opinion, has been a steal of the offseason here for Denver. They essentially got him for a 6th-round pick. And now we see what the New York Jets look like. Hope Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams are having fun over there. But JFM's been huge. It's allowed DJ Jones to move back to his natural spot at the nose tackle position. Zach Allen has emerged as a really, really exciting player who's pressuring the quarterback at an insane rate. And now you got the emergence of Nick Bonito at outside linebacker. He's the 2nd leading guy right now in the NFL with 9. And then, you've got Jonathan Cooper on the other side. But because of the trenches, they're not getting pushed back as much as they were last year, right? And it's allowing the linebackers to fill. Guys are eating up double teams and guys are rallying to the football. And then you get guys who can play anywhere in the secondary. I mean, you got Jaquan McMillan who's in the nickel. He can play inside, outside. Same thing with Riley Moss. Can line up anywhere inside, outside. And they're moving Pat Surtain around various matchups. So I imagine primarily we're going to see him on Jacoby Myers a little bit, but I imagine we're going to also see him quite a bit on Brock Bowers too in this game. So I think just the versatility that this defense now has opened things up for Vance, and he's kind of pinned his ears back, and these guys have been playing really good football.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned, Brock Bowers and Pat Surtain being on him, because I'm wondering when teams are going to start really putting their, number one corner on him, just because he's so good. And, we saw Jalen Ramsey on him a little bit last week against Miami, but he wasn't on him the whole time. And you saw what Brock Bowers did is get 13 catches. And I keep saying all week, I've been telling Raider fans, hey, just tell Gardner Minshew throw away from Pat Surtain. Just don't worry about him. Like, go anywhere else, but don't worry about Pat Surtain. Don't need to test him on Sunday. There's no really worry and concern, that he's going to be fine. Let him stand on that island by himself. But you mentioned, Riley Moss and others in that secondary. How has that secondary come together, right? And been able to be playing at a high level, knowing they're going to get tested more because Pat Surtain is so good on the other side?
They're embracing the challenge. They got a swagger to them. They know, like, hey, Pat's going to probably try to take away the best option. That means we're going to see more looks. Even you saw the Falcons try to move Drake London inside out a little bit. There were times where Pat would follow, but in certain situations, you have a defensive call based on down and distance. You can't necessarily, stay in that coverage, especially if you got motion. So they're trying to be smart about it. And those guys are stepping up and they're making plays. They're not giving up explosives. Riley Moss, you saw it in that first matchup. Trey Tucker's fast. Yeah. He's got speed, and Riley's matching him step for step on a stutter and go. It's just, that's a good trait that Riley has there. He plays big, and it's just, they're playing with a lot of confidence. They got guys in PJ Locke, Brandon Jones over the top. We'll see if Brandon Jones plays this week. He missed last week with an abdomen injury. He was limited all week. He was limited here on Wednesday's practice, so that's something we're going to be monitoring here for sure. But that secondary, they're playing really good football right now, and a lot of it's created by what the pass rush in the front seven's been able to do.
Well, I'll tell you, they're playing at a higher level than I thought, and I'm talking about the whole team, right? I'm sitting in third place right now in the AFC West at 6-5, and again, they're showing really, really good signs. I got to give Sean Payton and company a lot of credit for what they've been able to do. But, of course, Cody, we got to get into keys to victory. What is it going to take for the Broncos to get a dub? What is it going to take for the Raiders to get a dub? Snap this 6-game losing streak. We got to do that. We'll do that next. Cody Roark right there, host of Locked On Broncos, letting you know what's changed. And, again, he references that that pick six in week 5 by Pat Surtain. It was a game changer. It changed things for them. It definitely changed things for the Silver and Black. So what is it going to take for either team to come away with the victory? The Raiders need to snap their 6-game losing streak. The Broncos want, to get their first victory in Las Vegas. They've never done that at Allegiant Stadium, so they're trying to do that, accomplish that goal coming up on Sunday. We'll give you the keys to victory. We'll do it next in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, which is BetterHelp. And, well, it's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything, right? And in this crazy world, it isn't easy. So here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself, because, well, we all get help somehow, some way, right? People help us get to where we're at. Like, the people help me get to where I'm at, and a lot of people help you get to where you're at as well. So we've got to make sure that we send thanks, and we also take time to thank ourselves as well. So if you've ever thought about, thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched up with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We're about to jump into keys to victory. Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and myself talking all things Broncos and Raiders. We're going to let you know what it's going to take for the Broncos and the Raiders to pick up a victory. We'll do that after I tell you that the show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So with that being said, myself and Cody Roark, again, host of Locked On Broncos, we jump into some major keys to victory. What is it going to take for the Broncos to snap their losing streak at Allegiant Stadium? And what's it going to take for the Raiders to snap their losing streak, period? That's coming up right now here on the latest Locked On Raiders podcast.
Let's break down this matchup into what is it that these teams have to do, right? We always get into the cliches like, okay, you got to run the ball effectively. You got to have a better turnover differential. We could talk about the what's, but let's talk about the hows here. For the Las Vegas Raiders at 2-8, they're still finding ways to compete, even though things aren't going their way in the end result. You mentioned injuries play a factor into it. For a Raiders team and for a Broncos team, anytime these AFC West teams match up, I even think it's a great example. Look at the AFC North. The Baltimore Ravens earlier this year, they lost to the 1-6 Cleveland Browns. Records don't matter. You threw that out there earlier. For the Las Vegas Raiders to come out with a victory on Sunday and catch the Broncos as they're trying to get back into the postseason with a quarterback they believe is the guy, what is it and how can the Raiders win this game?
Well, first, I'm going to start with the defense because the defense was supposed to be the ones that did the heavy lifting when the season started. And for one reason or the other, a lot of it has to do with injuries. The defense just hasn't been there. But I do think that they need to create a couple turnovers. They just have not created very many turnovers this season. Their turnover differential is like -15. I mean, it's just about the worst in the league. It's not very good. So they've got to find a way to get their hands on the ball, maybe give their offense a short field and really set them up for success and have an opportunity to be successful, which means that they're going to have to get pressure on the quarterback. So you're going to need to see Max Crosby be the boogeyman, as you mentioned in reference before. He's been that guy. He's got to be that guy, right? And then there's got to have other help from guys like Tyree Wilson, John Jenkins, Adam Butler, those guys along the defensive line. They're going to have to get all kind of help there. Again, we'll see who's going to be out there for the secondary. But, when you don't have all your guys in the secondary, all your top guys, your starters, that means that the defensive line has even more strain on them, right? They've got to go in there and really make things a little bit easier, get to the quarterback a little bit quicker, make them get that ball to their hands and cause a mistake to be made, similar to what the Raiders did against Denver in week 5 when Minshew made a mistake. Patrick Surtain made him pay for it. Somebody's got to make Bo Nix pay for a mistake. If he creates a mistake or, there's a mistake forced, they've got to be able to capitalize that on and take advantage of it. So, the first and foremost, I just think that the defense is going to have to find a way to give their offense some short fields, create a couple turnovers, get some pressure on the quarterback. They've got to wreak havoc. And I think that you said it best. Max Crosby has to be the boogeyman. And on the flip side of things, Cody, Gardner Minshew just can't turn the ball over. Gardner Minshew has turned the ball over quite a bit, right? And there's a lot of Raider fans that are questioning why he's still the starting quarterback. Why didn't they go to Desmond Ridder, who he's nothing to write home about either? He was on the Cardinals practice squad when the Raiders got him. Aiden O'Connell's on IR. So not a lot of options, man. There's not a lot of flavors at the ice cream shop, right? It's basically vanilla or chocolate or other, right? And so it's not a whole plethora of different flavors to choose from. Minshew's got to take care of the ball. He really does. Brock Bowers is obviously the best playmaker for the Raiders. You got to get him involved early and keep them involved like they were last week when he had 13 catches. Scott Turner is the new OC. He's their interim OC. He's got familiarity, and the offense looked a lot better against Miami, but they weren't able to capitalize in the red zone. So if they get down to the red zone, don't throw a pick six. Right, you need to get into the end zone, score touchdowns, but you have to capitalize when you're in the red zone as well. So I think it really has come down to ball security. The Raiders defense has to take away the ball, and the Raiders offense has to secure the ball and make sure they hold on to it. I think those are going to be probably the two biggest things that the Raiders have to do to give themselves a chance to win this game on Sunday. When you're looking at the Broncos, though, what do they have to do or continue to do what they've been doing to get the victories that they've been stacking up?
Yeah, I always believe this, Q. In the world of football, when you play an opponent once and, you find a way to win or however it may be, I always feel like regardless, it's hard to beat that same team twice, right? You can't, you can do some of the same things that you had success with, but what is it that you're going to change? Because the Raiders, at least defensively, when they're going against the Broncos offense, they may say like, all right, hey, the first time we played these guys, this didn't work out well. Here's what we could have done better. Here's going to be our game plan, our emphasis here. And you always try to ask yourself, okay, hey, if we played these guys again, what would we do differently? Well, I think in that situation, we'll start with the Broncos defense against that Raiders offense and Gardner Minshew. And really, I remember that first drive that ended up Brock Bowers having a big time touchdown catch and run against PJ Locke. I remember there was a 3rd and 9 play where Gardner Minshew, he used his legs to pick up a first down, right? You extend drives, you sustain it. And you mentioned it too with, the new offense approach that they had there with Scott Turner. The Broncos didn't go against Scott Turner in that first game. So it's like, how are they going to game plan from, okay, hey, here's what we had success with in that week 5 matchup, but here's what they're doing now. Here's the different wrinkles that they're adding into the mix here. That I think is going to be a little challenge. I'm excited to see how that's going to kind of play out here. I think one of the bigger keys is getting off the field on 3rd down. Denver, granted, it was against Kansas City. Kansas City is the best 3rd down offense in all of football. And Denver, they did a really good job on a handful of plays, but then it's just like, hey, 3rd and 13, Mahomes scrambles, picks it up. He does that against everybody. So you have to have better 3rd down numbers. The Broncos did that this past week against the Atlanta Falcons. I believe held them to 4 of 13 in that game. Kirk Cousins and that high-powered offense that has the capability of scoring. But now it's like, all right, hey, limit the explosives here from Brock Bowers. Look, if Amir Abdullah is going to start at running back, the emphasis first is going to be, hey, come out and stop the run, right? Because the run game opens things up in the passing game for any offense that you have there. So the emphasis is going to be, hey, come out and stop the run. It doesn't matter if it's Zamir White, Alexander Madison, if these guys somehow find a way to be healthy, or if it's Amir Abdullah, you got to find a way to stop the run first, and then find yourself in manageable 2nd down situations, manageable 3rd and mediums, 3rd and longs, and then you can trust your technique and you kind of pin your ears back a little bit. I think that's going to be a big key here for the Broncos defense, those 3rd down numbers specifically. Nick Bonillo has been on a tear from the sack production there, and Can he get a sack here this week and extend that and close the gap there on Trey Hendrickson, who has 11.5 in the league right now? That's going to be a key to watch. I would say another thing here, if we're going to shift gears here to the offensive side, especially for Bo Nix and the Broncos offense, certainly the Raiders defense, they're watching what they're doing. The passing game for Bo and the offense in Denver has certainly evolved a little bit. You got Cortland Sutton now as the primary guy. I think he really started to get going in that Raiders game specifically with a couple of big catches. But then it's like, all right, now you got Devon Vele. Josh Reynolds could return into the lineup. They're using Marvin Mims in an entirely different role than they had early on in the season. I mean, he's getting some reps at receiver, but he's lining up in the backfield as a running back. He's a motion guy. And so they're using him as a little bit of a weaponized feature. And then you get rookie Troy Franklin, who's also making plays as well. But then in the run game, the Denver hasn't had Q. They haven't had a consistent 100-yard. They haven't had a 100-yard rusher from one specific player. They've amassed over 100 yards of rushing production spread out between guys like Bo Nix, Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and even rookie Audric Estime is now getting a little bit more involved. We asked Sean Payton this week about the running back rotation because there really is no clear one at this point.
Right.
And he says, that's the $6 million question. He says, this is hard for us to figure out. So they are going to use Javonte. They are going to use Jaleel, who's a change of pace speed back. And then they're starting to sprinkle in a little bit more Audric Estime, who's a big body, bulky guy. He reminds me of Doug Martin a little bit here, Q. He's big. He's got huge biceps.
Okay. Yeah.
He's almost as tall as me. He might even be an inch shorter than me at this point. But, man, he's hard to bring down there. So they're really going to try to get the run game going because that was something they really couldn't do against the Raiders in that first matchup. It was, hey, we got to pass and convert some drives here on third down through the air. You know, the run game is the Raiders like, hey, we want you to throw the football. We're going to play zone coverage, keep everything in front, rally and tackle, but we want you to throw the football. Now it's about balance. That's where the Broncos are really trying to find it. And I feel like that's going to be a major emphasis for them this weekend against the Raiders. You have to get the run game going to a point where, hey, it's keeping you on the field a little bit longer and finding a way to wear down Max Crosby. Like, keep Max Crosby on the field for quite some time. Look, he's going to play with a high motor, but keep him on the field. You know, especially if your offense can find a way to end with points and score in the red zone, which they've done a really good job at doing. That right there, I think, can be a difference maker for them. I think that's if the Broncos are going to find a way to win on the road and snap that losing streak against the Raiders. They haven't won on the road against the Raiders since they were in Oakland. So it's been a while. Yeah. It's been a minute. That could change this week, but I know the Broncos, they're not overlooking the Raiders. This could be a trap game on paper, and I know the players are wanting to avoid that, but Denver has to achieve those things if they're going to win here on Sunday.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, the Raiders have struggled to stop the run consistently this year. So, I mean, if the Broncos are going to lean on the run game and try to be balanced, that's a good recipe. And, you know, you mentioned getting off the field on third down, and that's such a huge key for the Raiders as well. Last week against Miami, man, they never forced a punt. Not one punt. Oof. Right, exactly. Miami was 8 for 12 on third down and 2 for 2 on fourth down. Never one time did they punt the ball. So that tells you right there, that was one of my big hangups. Like, wait, you got to find a way to get off the field. Even on 3rd and 20, they had like a holding penalty, or 3rd and 9, then they had a illegal contact penalty. You know, even when they did stop them, they didn't because of a penalty. So they've got to find a way to do that. That's going to be a huge key, obviously, for both teams, getting off the field on third down. And the Raiders haven't ran the ball very well at all this season. They had one game where they went to 152 yards. That was week 4 against Cleveland. And that was really a couple of their running backs or their wide receivers, I should say, got loose in the running game, not really their running backs. So that's been a big bugaboo for Antonio Pierce and the Raiders. They just haven't had a consistent run game. So the run game is going to be important on both sides of the ball for both teams, and getting off the field on third down is clearly going to be very important for both teams as well.
Now, we appreciate everyone in Broncos Country, Raiders Nation, for tuning into today's crossover episode. I've seen it well because I upload on YouTube. A lot of Raiders fans not happy about the AFC squad shows. And trust me, Q would be on there. Q's the busiest man in the industry. We would love to have Q on there to be able to talk and represent the Raiders. But, you know, we're going to open it up as even the offseason goes on. There's going to be a lot there. But as always, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you listen to Locked On Broncos or Locked On Raiders for your first listen every single day. We appreciate you so much here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So there it is. That was today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, crossover style, doing it with Cody Roark, one of the best in the business, host of Locked On Broncos. Really a big fan of Cody and his work. He's been rocking with the Locked On Podcast Network for a very long time. And as I mentioned at the top, man, he welcomed me in with open arms and has been a real deal dude ever since. So I definitely appreciate him, and many thanks to him as well for some guidance early on in this process. But there you go. That gives you an idea of what to expect from the Denver Broncos, who come come into Allegiant Stadium on Sunday at 6-5. And obviously, you know the Raiders riding a 6-game losing streak. So something's got to give on Sunday, and we'll find out. But the week is not over. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll finish out the week real strong. We'll get back to your calls and texts. I'll have keys to victory of my own, a little bit more than what we elaborated on here on the show. And, of course, we'll have news and notes and what's going on with the Silver and Black. We'll do that all on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. We close out the week really strong. And until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.